People like to say that, like, see, Vlad always refers to people as his friends, like Jamar. Jamar wasn't really his friend. He just stopped looking at industry people like they're his friends. None of them are his friends. And I never took it like that. I thought, like, no, I'm still going to have friends in the industry. And I do consider the Jamar and even Godfrey at the time were my friends. It just didn't work out. It doesn't mean that everyone is fake. Shit just doesn't work out.
See, I'm just a man of principles and morals. Like, you see what I'm saying? And we don't have a lot of those left, And there's certain shit that, you got to set certain boundaries at time and let people know what you're about. And, sometimes there's sacrifice that comes with that, whatever it might be. But if you really about the shit that you say you about, then you got to do that. You know what I mean? So to me, in my mind, I just felt like, you know what I mean? Me and my community was being disrespected, and I can't stand by that. Can't sit and stand by that.
Look, man, leading up to that situation, I had multiple NOI member interviews, prominent people in the NOI, as well as, Malcolm X's daughter and so forth, all the related. And plus, you're on all the time. You're 5%, which is an NOI offshoot and so forth. So I never had any sort of animosity against this group. Even use these guys as security sometimes, and, so forth. So when, all this happened, it was suddenly painted that I'm suddenly a certain type of way. And it was like, nah, I'm not really like that. But the problem was that I was choosing not to say anything about it. And that, I think, was a mistake. To the point where I would do interviews, I'd be like, no Farrakhan questions. And everyone would respect that. If you notice, I've probably done about 40 interviews since that time. You've never heard it mentioned ever, because I've always, I'd pull people aside and be like, yo, listen, no questions about family, no questions about Farrakhan. Like, what I'm saying? Like, this is what I'm, respectfully asking ahead of time. And people are like, okay, cool, So I didn't address the shit. So people were running around and creating stories about this situation, which were not always accurate. Because people would have conversations with me and start making videos, and the videos were like, nah, that's not what I said. Or no, that's definitely not what I meant.
But based on your actions,
based on my actions,
what people are getting from it.
Right, and the fact that I'm not responding and I'm not actually speaking about it, and that's something that I've learned not to do moving forward. Like, as I went through other shit, I would just, okay, let me address it. And then in interviews, in my own interviews, other people's interviews, go ahead and ask. Let's talk about it. The Princeton professor situation, let's talk about what happened. I'm cool. We'll talk about that. Marlon Wayne situation, let's talk about, this is what happened. Yeah, I was an asshole. I apologize. I still don't feel that anyone in the world has paid him that type of money for an interview, but that's his own business. And I was just being a jerk about it. You see what I'm saying? You asked me for 30% for all the past interviews. Was that sort of a Marlon Wayne's reference, sort of, in a way? Because that was the same percentage he wanted on top of the 40.
I don't know. That was just running something up the flagpole and seeing if it fly. But here's the thing, and I know you're acting standing. I'm not going to give you 30%. Here's the thing, right? And this is like a white people thing that shouldn't be. Right?
Okay.
Sometimes there's what's legal and like what's on paper, and then there's what's morally right. Right? You would say stuff like, oh, he signed a release and all of that type of stuff. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And legally, you don't have to pay nobody nothing. But black people, original people, we don't go by these papers and all this type of shit. You know what I mean? We go by what we feel is like true justice, like moral justice. So that being said, if somebody helps you build something up, and I guess this is almost like, some of the argument that people have for reparations and shit like that. If we've helped you build something up, to the point where it's positive cash flow and all of that type of shit, and you're not asking for 30% of Vlad TV or whatever the case may be, you might be asking for whatever percentage that's negotiable for your particular interviews.
Right.
Hang on, let me just say, if you were to do that, it would not break the company. Just like, because that was one of your things that you said about reparations. If they were to pay reparations, it would break the economy.
That video still goes viral, but there are future videos after that where I said I was actually wrong for saying that, and I apologize.
Okay.
I publicly addressed that. Those with like multiple people, including D.L. Hughley. But unfortunately, those don't get the type of play that whatever 6-year-old video still gets.
So
yeah,
I'm just
I
saying,
addressed that.
I'm just saying, they say that whoever got the Dutch got Manhattan, for some mirrors and shit like that, and now people are like, they played those Indians and type of shit. Like, is that morally right? You see what I'm saying? Like, even if the Indians agreed to it, is it morally right that they did that? And could they have went back and be like, you know what, we got this from y'all, and I know we didn't hit y'all off, but damn, we did really good, and you know what I mean? Just as a token of my appreciation, here you go.
Right. Well, here's the thing with that. I mean, you talked about this, but everyone should hear it. The company was doing well at the time, but it was nowhere near where it was later on. We had a massive amount of cost. Like, this studio we're sitting in right now is $20,000 a month.
That's crazy.
And by the time you and I fell out,
it's been that much the whole time.
It's been that much the whole time.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? That's just the New York studio. There's also the LA studio. There's also, I think at the time, something like 15 employees. A lot of expenses are happening. And at the time, nobody was getting paid for interviews. But a few months after you and I fell out, we did start paying for interviews. And you would have been part of that. You would have been the first one in line. In fact, this studio, at the point that we were building it, I was thinking, yo, Jamar and Godfrey got this podcast they're doing together. This would actually be a good place to do the podcast. You see what I'm saying? I'm thinking ahead, like, yo, maybe that would be a way that we could do it and take it to the next level where they could do their podcast here with my staff and we could figure out some sort of situation around it. But then me, you, and Godfrey fell out.
Because we felt unappreciated.
But a few months later, everybody started getting paid. Lunel, TK Kirkland, Boosie, like everyone who you saw show up at Vlad TV every couple of months, every few months, a few times a year. Every single person, nobody's going to deny this, has been paid from the middle of 2020 to the middle of 2025 to this day. So it was one of those situations where it was going to happen, but you and I fell apart before it could.
I hear that. I hear that.
But that's the actual truth. It's not a storyline. It's like, oh, if you were born on the other side of town. No, I mean, this was actually happening in real life. So it was one of these unfortunate situations, man, that became bigger than it should have. And I take a lot of the blame for that. And, it was something that I learned a lot from. And I'm not happy it happened, but I'm also happy it happened because it caused a lot of growth. And ultimately, when you and I spoke, at the end of the conversation, I'm really glad that we spoke. We didn't even talk about doing an interview in that conversation. That was just Vlad and Jamar rehashing the past and seeing where we are conversation. The conversation about the interview came later.
Right. I said this conversation is not about money.
Right.
Vlad.
And it wasn't.
You know what I mean?
It wasn't. But the points you made sense to me. So, and what I said, even because the Esquino interview, I'm sure you saw.
Not the whole thing, but yes, the portion.
That segment, the
yes.
segment. I said, I'm not going to turn around and pay 30% or whatever else, but moving forward, he said, "Oh well, if Jamar wants to do some move forward." I'm like, "Yeah, we could absolutely do business." And this is where we are right now, actually doing business.
Right.
And it feels good to do business because this is something I wanted to do 5 years ago.
But like you said, motherfuckers need to grow. Like, you know what I mean? And it was impossible to do that 5 years ago. But here's the thing also, that whole episode showed me that a lot of people would just be talking shit. They're not really about what they say they're about. You know what I mean? Like they act like, oh, let's fucking, you know what I mean? Let's do this. Let's take over the fucking podcast game and some black shit. They're not really about that shit. They don't really want to do all the shit. They want to bitch and moan about a lot of shit in the comments, but they don't really want to fucking, do what it takes to support some shit and to really have your own type of shit. Yeah. It pisses me off.